Alright, now we're getting ready to prepare the next half of the frame. Just putting these through here, and then the long spacers. If you're trying to do that first and then put the other stuff on, it'll be kind of a pain because you won't actually screw it into anything. So just hold these together last. First, just put the servo mounts. Now if we hold this other half of the frame the same way, this is the front and the back over here. You can see there's the servo mount here, which is going to go in from this side because this is going to be the inside of the helicopter, and also from this side is where we put the ball bearing, the flange bearing, in on this side. And then all of this other stuff, this is going to come in on this side, and then this is going to come in on this side, just like we did the other half of the frame with these long spacers in the middle. So just make sure you get your flange bearing, this servo mount, and then in the back the servo mount is on the opposite side. It's going to be on the outside because that, I think, this is for the tail servo, and that's going to go on this side. So the servo mounts on the inside of the frame in the front, and on the outside of the frame in the back. Again, we use that little tiny screw in here to hold that in place, the little 2x6mm screw. So this is this part. Now we're going to put this together, and then really quickly just once we have these all the way through here and in these spacers, basically it's not much left to do but screw it into the frame, which is also right now just kind of place holding all of these carbon fiber plates for mounting all the electronics. And once you put that other side on there and then screw into these guys, then it'll all come together, and then same as on the other side, we'll have the little plates here. Let's see, got my lighter there. So we've got this little plate here that we will end up putting on the outside there, and same with this plate here on the bottom of this, and all those 2x8mm or 3x8mm screws with blue thread lock in these side of the frames, and then we'll have the main frame just about put together and ready to go. So we're going to put that together, and then we'll show you this once we've put the two halves together. Okay, so here we are with the second half of the frame. Believe it or not, these screws actually screw into the carbon fiber pretty well. They're still loose and you can screw them in some more, but they will actually hold this in place enough so you don't have to be holding all of this stuff while you're putting it together. So you can put these, make sure you get this outer frame and that it faces the front. You can tell just the way it looks, how it's supposed to go in there. So you just put that in there, put these 6 screws in here. Again, these two are the ones that use the 25mm. You'll use the 28mm all along here. And we've got that second half here ready to go. Flange bearings, servo mounts, and that is ready to go. So that's assembly 4 and 5 here in the instruction manual. Looks like the next part, we're going to put the two halves of the frames together. So we've got all of these 3x8mm screws. There's, what, 12 of them. It looks like we've got all this hardware that we set aside earlier ready to go, and all of these electronic mounts. So make sure those line up and that you clamp them together, and then probably just want to put the screws around those, like these guys, all on first, and then go all the way around, just get them kind of loose before you get them really, really tight. And then after we get those main frame screws on, looks like we're going to use these little plates and put that on like the motor mount. And all these spots where it slides, again, don't get it too tight because some of those parts are still going to need to be shifting forward and back. So get those done. Again, you know, carve out all the holes. When you have all of the indents from these washers coming in, it's always good to just get in there and sand all of the holes out. And like I've been doing, I take a knife and just kind of twist it inside of these guys, like for instance this hole, I'll just kind of do that, and that kind of clears it away pretty well for me. And you just blow that off and it's good to go. So we're going to pull together all of that hardware and second half of the frame, line these up front and back, put these together. Looks like we're going to have to line that little shaft up. Okay, so just like this, and then we're going to get all the screws to hold this together, and this is basically what it's going to look like. But we'll put those screws in now with the blue thread lock. Make sure you do that, get the grease off of all those screws, blue thread lock, hold that in place. We'll come show you what it looks like. Okay, so here it is, the frame, both sides sandwiched together. This side, all we had to do was same thing we did on the other side. Make sure we've got all these holes filled. We were going to use this alias plate right here and this little plate here, and I'm going to make sure those are loose enough so that those bearing supports are sliding back and forth and the motor mount is sliding back and forth. I'm going to have to pull this off once I get the shaft for the motor that I'm using, but the motor I cut the shaft a while back and it was for another helicopter, so once that shaft comes in I will be putting the motor into the frame. But in the meantime, we've got plenty more to build. This is the end of the frame. Long canopy mount up here, short canopy mount here. Battery trays are ready to go. Here's a look at it from the bottom. Nice, solid, seems to hold together really well. One thing to make sure when you're putting the second half on, slide it on there, start doing these 6 so that you're screwing into the other half, these little middle grommets right here, those spacers. And when you're doing that, make sure you're paying attention to where these guys end up, all of these little carbon fiber trays, because if it goes off, you might find that you're tightening it and you might find it like violently snap into place. So just make sure those are lined up. Might want to just do these ones in the front, tighten these 2, make sure this one's in place, and then make sure this one's in place, and then you can do these top 2, and then make sure this one's in place, and you can get this one going. And then just kind of go around and screw them all in, and later on we'll probably take 2 of these and we'll go on both sides to make sure that they're nice and tight. So this is the frame. This part is moving nice and smooth, and we're about ready to move on to the next step. So what we just did here was this and this, and now we will move on to putting these bell cranks in place. We've got the spacer that we pulled out. Looks like we've got a washer, 3x5mm cap screw here in the end to probably screw into this. Looks like this one on the right side, looking from the rear of the helicopter. We're going to put this elevator crank before we put this aileron crank on this. So these that we prepared earlier, we're just going to line it up, put the helicopter just the way it looks in the instructions here, and line up these cranks the way they're supposed to. Looks like, see how there's a bend here? The smaller angle will go towards the top, and the arm will face towards the front. So that one is going to be on that side, and then this arm, let's see here, yeah, so it will be facing in like this. That one will be on this side. So we've got those lined up, we know which side they're going on. Just got to get all the spacers and everything in there, and then we'll come and show you once those little bell cranks are all installed. Also, just make sure you use the thread lock and don't use too much, because like right here, if you use too much, it might come out, it might get in the bearings and gunk it up. Same here. Just use a little bit of thread lock in there, and make sure you use the blue. Okay, now we have gotten this assembly 9 done here. We've added all of the bell cranks, and this one took a little bit of time and a little bit of attention to detail. With this spacer here and these washers here at the end, you've got these 1mm washers, and I think these 5mm screws that you've got going in here. What you want to do is, your goal is to make sure this one moves freely by itself without moving the other ones, and same with this one, that moves freely, and that when you move this middle one, it just moves this bell crank right here, and the other two are pretty much, so they're all nice and smooth and moving on their own. And you might find that once you put it in there, that once you tighten both of these really good, both of these sides, that something's tight, that maybe you move one and it gets the other ones to move. You don't want that. What I would recommend is, what I like to do is get in here, unscrew these two. Actually, I pull one out all the way and keep one backed out just a little bit. The one that you can look for this flat spot, and also don't add these grub screws yet. So say you've got this sandwiched together, you've got the two parts sticking out. Put this bell crank in here, put this bell crank in here, put this bell crank in here, and then this thing's going to be moving around loose inside. Put the two screws on the end with the washers. If you find that there's not enough length, I actually had to take this little spacer right here, and I went over some sandpaper to grind it down a little bit. I actually, to make it quicker, I used my Dremel tool, but you got to be careful. You don't want to grind too much of that down. But I actually just pulled about 1 millimeter off of this spacer so that I had enough space and it wasn't compressing on these bell cranks. So you might want to do that, pull that spacer out and sand some of that away if you're having that problem. So once we've got that, we've got these two sides, and if you can get these two screws on each end and have that nice and tight, then what you're going to want to do is move this little middle elevator arm assembly to where you can tighten one of these. You'll want to line it up with one of the flat spots, tighten this, and make sure this is controlling this shaft and that everything is still moving tight. And then once you've got that, you can put the other screw in there and tighten that one. And then the final thing you'll want to do is this little elevator, or this middle bell crank here that connects to the elevator shaft, has two grub screws, one on that side, one on the other side. And there's a little bit of room down here so you can push this arm underneath and get access both sides. So what you're going to want to do is make sure while that's moving freely, you set one grub screw on the flat spot and then get the other side on the other flat spot. There's also another flat spot here on this shaft inside that we don't use for anything. So just make sure you do that, take the time, do it right. These screws first, then the ones in the middle, and then this belt crank, and then you want to make sure everything's moving nice and smooth. So that's that assembly. We've got the bell crank arms. Also, again, make sure the way you have it set up, these have the angle. The smaller angle goes towards the top of the frame. The larger angle goes towards the bottom. So the way these fit, if it's on the wrong side, just switch them and make sure that when it goes forward, you've got this smaller angle towards the top. So those are all those. Got the frame there ready to go, and it looks like the next step, assembly 8 here, is putting the skids on. So we're going to go get that hardware, which all comes in its own bag. Looks like it's all in there ready to go. We've got the caps on the end, we've got the hardware in there. So pretty simple and straightforward. We're going to be screwing, looks like, okay, so we've got some washers in there, some 3x8x1, and the screws that go there. Try to look for the length on those. I think it's the 3x14 millimeter. Those are going to screw up into these frame mounts. And there's also some smaller 2.5 by 10 millimeter, which are going to go into the frames once you put the skid pipes in there. And those are going to be used to hold those in place on all four corners. So we'll get this stuff out, we'll put the skids on there. Really simple and straightforward. All the hardware is in one spot. Really easy. So we'll show you how that looks when it's all done here in just a minute. Okay, main frame coming together here. We've got the skids on. Pretty simple. Use the hardware and the washers. Blue thread lock, put them through there. You've got a little bit of room for them to slide back and forth. Line them up. I have mine going forward like it's supposed to, but you know, some guys like to put them going backwards. I've seen that, you know, with it going that way. If you want to do that, that's fine. You may think it looks cooler. It's really up to you, but I'm just going to make it go forward. Pretty cool looking, nice solid frame. Once we get it all together, all the electronics will go up here and here, motor up here, and it looks like that is pretty much finished up right there. We put the screws through here and tightened them. Make sure, if you're anal about it, the alias is facing towards the outside when you're looking at it. You can actually swap the skids. It'll look different. It'll face the inside if it doesn't matter to you. You can do that, but I like to do this so it just looks the way it's intended. So that's the end of assembly 8, the landing gear. Looks like the next part is installation of the servos. So assembly 5 and 9 right here. Looks like we're going to pull out the last little metal piece that we've got in this box right here. I think this is the servo mount. So we'll be pulling that out, and we already pulled out these carbon fiber servo keepers. I've got my servos ready to go. We're going to have to put together these ball links. That's always fun. Measure them out to 22.5 and one of 6.5, and we'll have, I think, 2 of these and 2 of these, because these are the push-pull setup. Let's see what else we have in here. That looks like it's about it. So we'll get that hardware out. Basically this guy and some of these 2.5 by 8 pieces of hardware that came in that bag from earlier, or it's located in here. Nope, these look like they're the ball links that go on these ends. So these linkage balls here, and all of the linkage rod ends are in one hardware bag. And I've still got some hardware that I set aside from earlier. And after that, it looks like there's the servos here. All of that stuff is facing up, straight up and down with the servo wheel. I'll have some more details here for you once I take a closer look at them. But we're going to make sure we follow. These use, let's see, 2.5 by 12 millimeter. We'll just find all the hardware for that and show you the inventory of what we're going to be putting in here. And I will actually get these linkage rods ready to go. And then we will show you that. Then we'll actually install them one at a time and show you each servo after we've put them in. So, on to the next step. Okay, now that we've got most of the hardware out here and ready to go, like we mentioned previously, we are here on assembly 5.9, page 18. I've measured these out, and I've also measured this one out, and then the most exciting part of putting together all of those linkage rods. So now that those are made and measured out, I'll probably have to ream those out a little bit, but I'll test them. I'm going to put the servos in, but I'm not going to put the servo wheels in. I'm going to wait and do that when I set up my flybarless system. I'm setting up my icon, and at 90/90 we'll just make sure that these are at 50/50 mid-stick on my transmitter. Make sure that these are 90 degrees from the servo here, and looks like it recommends 11 to 12 millimeters from the center. So I will find that point on my servos. We'll be putting this, I think, elevator servo right here, and I think this is one of the aileron servos. So we'll be adding that. I'm using 8717s for this project. It looks like, okay, so what it says is here in the back, we're going to use this guy. It looks like we're going to install it. Let's see, I think I want to have the alias facing towards the back. Yeah, that's what I want to go for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed the wire here through the middle part of this servo mount. And that is going to go in there like so. And that will be, I believe, I actually put it in the wrong way. So I can still put this here in the back, but make the servo face this way. Okay, so we can do that. In the back here, it shows we're going to be using some of those 2.5 by 8. That's in this hardware bag here that you'll find. Also, just one note, if you're looking for all of these carbon fiber rods, if you look in this case, you would find that they're hiding in there. So that is exactly where those are, just in case you can't find those. So we're going to be screwing this servo mount into the back after we screw the servo here into the mount with these carbon fiber servo plates. And then that one is going in there, and it looks like we're also going to add this servo to the front. So just those two servos, pretty basic. Use these. Looks like there's also those C washers, those M2.5mm washers. Looks like no washers here on this one. So washers here where we're driving into the metal servo mount. No washers, just directly into the carbon fiber when we're using these 2.5 by 12mm screws to screw the servo into the servo mount. So just pay close attention to that. We'll get these two servos installed. Again, not putting these plates on here yet, the servo wheels, which means I also won't be putting these on yet. We will do this in another step after we set up the flybarless controller. Because the reason we're doing that is because I want to make sure I've got as much 90/90 on the center of the servo at center stick, so I have to add the least amount of trim in the flybarless setup that is necessary. And then also at that point, that's when I will put these on, and I might have to adjust the lengths a little bit just to make sure that there's as little buzzing and binding in the servos as possible. So it's about just making everything nice and clean, make sure it fits well, you're not forcing things, and then the servos are a lot happier and they'll last longer for you. So we'll get these servos installed, and then we'll come take a look at these after we're done. Okay, now at this point I've just installed all of the servos, got this elevator servo back here and the two cyclic servos here and here, It was pretty simple. We had all those long hardware screws that we had left. The 8 millimeters, the short ones, went into the back here with these washers to hold the elevator servo in place. I've got the alias sign facing down. The servo end is facing forward towards the front of the helicopter. Make sure you've got that set up right. We used some 2.5 by 12 millimeter screws to hold that in place. We have some 2.5 times 15 millimeter to hold this front right one, this one right here, in place. And then for some reason on the left side, for this next page, assembly 5.9, we use the 2.5 by 14. Why we use 14 on this side and 15 on this side, right now I haven't figured out a good reason, but you will find that of those long screws, some are a little bit longer than the others. 15 millimeter on this side, 14 millimeter on this side. I just followed it. I really have no idea why. You can probably interchange those 14 and 15, but I just don't want to mess with it. So 14 millimeter to hold this side in, and just put them all in there, get them kind of hand tight, and then kind of go around a few times, getting them a little tighter all the way around. Same here. These are something that after you fly a few times, you might want to just double check the tightness, make sure those are staying in there, and you use the blue thread lock. And then through here, I put the servo into this servo mount before I put the whole thing in place here. Also make sure that this arm, this elevator arm, is up and forward before you put this in. If it's down there and underneath the servo, you won't be able to get it out, so you'll have to pull this back out again, pull this up, and then put it in there. So make sure you have this up before you put this in place. And then you've got some holes here where if you need to tighten these, you can, but I got these nice and tight in here before I put this in place, and then I drill them back there. So that is the frame with the servos installed. I've measured out all of my linkages. There's a few sets of them. Here and here and here, and even on the next page we're going to have these 28 millimeter. I've measured those ones out. Those are all ready to go. I've got all of my servo wheels ready, but again, we're not going to put those in until we set up the flybarless controller to make sure that we've got it closest to center without changing it, and figured out which horn goes best on which servos. Those details I will cover just a little bit, but as far as the programming, I'm using an Icon flybarless controller, and I've already made a video showing how to set that up, so you can actually check my channel and refer to how to program an Icon flybarless controller, and any details on that you can find on that video. But that's a whole nother topic. But still, we've got this hardware here that is going to go on the servo arms once I know which holes are going to line up best for it to be perpendicular. And then at that point we're going to put those on 11 to 12 millimeters apart. So it looks like, since we finished up this assembly 5 and 9, this assembly 5.9 basically just putting the servos in place and measuring out the linkage rods. Looks like assembly 7 is, let's see, we'll get this out of the way here. Looks like assembly 7 here is the main gear. That looks to be mostly finished up in the factory. It's got some hardware here in the bag, but that looks like it's pretty much done in the factory. All of these bearings and everything put in place. Looks like it only goes the one way as it should. If it goes the opposite, then you're probably moving the inner bearing there. Everything looks like it's lined up, so that's factory made, factory installed. I'm going to check all the screws on there, make sure it's got thread lock, but if it's anything like the rest of the build, it's already got the thread lock built into it. So I'm guessing this part is pretty much done for you. All we're going to do is take all these parts, the frame, the head, and this main drive gear, and we're going to put them in all together. We've got the head here. We've got to put the ball links on for the swash plate, which basically, I already checked these. These don't need to be reamed out. These are reamed out really good. They're nice and smooth, so you can actually just snap them right on there onto the swash plate. We're going to put that in there, and there is actually some hardware, I believe, right here. This is going to screw into the bottom of the main shaft. It looks like from here. So the main shaft goes through the main drive gear, and then the shaft retainer right here goes into the bottom with some blue thread lock. And then we're going to put this cap screw through, this 26mm, through that, and it'll go through this hole. And later on we're going to line these linkage rods up with the servos. But again, we're going to do all that when we set up the flybarless head controller. So we're going to put all these pieces together to get these parts finished up, and then we'll come and show you that part before we start moving on to the tail, which is what, we'll be looking at the tail after that part. So finish up the whole head and the front and the main part of the body, and we'll come and show you that. Okay, now taking a closer look here at Assembly 7, the drive gear. Most of this is factory assembled, but if you take it apart you will actually notice that these longer 3x8mm screws are not screwed in here from the bottom, and the 3x6mm are not screwed in from the top. So you will want to make sure you take this guy apart. It's very easy, nothing's holding it in place. So you pull that out, and you're going to want to pull this part out too. And in this bottom section we've got these longer, we'll have 6 3x8mm screws, and then we'll also have 6 of these 3x6mm screws. So these are going to go into the top. We'll use those ones later. These we're going to clean off all the grease, put the blue thread lock in there, and then put those in here where these line up all around here. We'll just kind of hand tighten them and then go around again and tighten them again. Then we'll put that into this here, and we'll put this over the top, line up the holes, and use the 6mm along here, and same again, just pretty much hand tight, and then go around it a few more times and get them a little tighter. So we'll get this finished up, and then we'll be ready to move on to these next steps, where we put the main gear inside the frame, and then we take this head assembly, put it through there, and then we'll drive that cap screw through the whole thing and put the retainer shaft in the bottom of that. It looks like we might be able to get a screwdriver in there to hit up that retainer shaft from underneath. Let's see, it's just a flathead, so I'm going to have to go find my flathead screwdriver and use that to get that in there in the bottom of this main shaft. So you can see, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's some threading there on the inside that we'll use to put that whole thing together. So we'll come show the main shaft finished up. It'll basically look the same, just it's going to have all those screws in there, and then take a look at these 3 pieces and then put them together and show you the final product of that. Alright, now just some more detailed notes about putting the head installation together here. We finished up this main gear. We've put these 6 main screws on the top, 6mm on the top, the 8mm on the bottom. To hold that in place, we've lined up the plastic holes here with the shaft that comes through, and that is going to end up lining up with this hole here in this shaft. So what we'll do is we'll end up putting this in here, and what we want though is to make sure that when we put this together that it goes through nice and smooth. So let's see here. Okay, I've got the servo wire in my way here, so I'll get that out of the way. Okay, but see how nice and smooth, like I'm barely, just under its own weight, it will drop right in there. So we're going to have that, and we're going to want to make sure that when we tighten things that it's that smooth going in. And keep in mind, this shaft down here at the bottom has a lot of up and down play. So this is how we get away with not having a collar up here, is we screw through the bottom, and we're also going to make sure we have a really long flathead screwdriver so that we can at least get past the battery tray. So we'll be screwing in from the bottom there, tighten that. Let's see. So this is what we'll be tightening on the bottom. We'll put some blue thread lock, and we've pulled together our long flathead screwdriver, which will be going into that. So if you can get a really long flathead screwdriver to get that in nice and tight, that will be coming in from the bottom. And once you get that in there, you'll be able to push this all the way up here. See, this bottom bearing, you push it up to make sure that there's no play here in the main gear. So this one's nice and tight. Bearing here is nice and tight. Moves nice and smooth throughout. Put this main gear set in here. Line up the holes. Put this through. Like so. So it's nice and smooth. So that still moves up and down. And now is where we're going to come through the bottom with that piece of hardware, screw that in place, and then push this main block up, and then tighten these screws on both sides. Okay, and then we'll have that whole front assembly ready to go. Alright, here we go. Now that we've put the whole head installation together, we've put these two linkage rods in here. Again, they were all really tight, so I reamed them out to make sure they were just loose enough so I could at least give them a little bit of a push and get them to move. I guess they're going to ream out a little bit also after the first 5 to 10 flights, and should loosen up as well. But I like to pull just a little bit out of there. Again, this down here, it was really easy to push this up through here and screw this on nice and tight. Ball links are on there. It's all kind of a temporary fit for now. If we have to make any mechanical adjustments when we get the flybarless unit on there, we will do that. But this is the look of it as it is. Done with the main frame, landing gear, and the head. And now it's about time to move on to the tail, which later we'll have to install here. But we can put this to the side for now. I still need to get my main shaft for my motor, and then we'll get that. Get the whole thing finished up. Looks pretty nice. This should be moving through nice and smooth. Twist this around. Also make sure that you, when you ream these to size, or you twist these down to size, I think it's 28 millimeters in between these and the gaps. Make sure that the sides that are going to connect to the ball links are facing nice and straight. Not so, to say that another way, you don't want this to be kind of twisted to the side while it's lined up straight in this one. You're going to make sure straight up against the ball, that's lined up straight when it's lined up straight down here as well. So we've got that whole thing going. Swash plate moves up and down nice and smooth. Everything moves around nice and smooth as it should. So that's what we're looking for. Nothing is too tight. Tightness is bad. It puts too much load on our servos. So here we go on to the next step.